Hello and welcome to NYU Shanghai. My name is Juan Roldan and I'm one of the admissions counselors here. First of all, a big congratulations to all of you who have been admitted. This is an incredible achievement and you should be very proud of it. Today, we have a very exciting day planned for you to have an opportunity to get to know and engage with different people around our community so you can get all your questions answered and learn what it would be like to join our incredible community. So for this next hour, we'll have a session led by, we'll have some opening remarks by our Dean of Students. Then we'll have a session led by our amazing current students who will be able to talk about their experiences here and answer your questions. So before we get started, one thing to know is that you may all be familiar with the Zoom chat functions and Q&A functions. So that's actually disabled for this session. So to get your questions answered instead, please go into the Home for the Weekend platform where you'll be able to enter your questions in the chat box right below where you joined the session today. This way, we'll be able to track all your questions, and even after the session is over, if there are any questions remaining, the questions will be saved. So we'll be able to reach out to you directly to make sure that you have all your questions answered. And this will be the case for the duration of the days, not just this session. So without further ado, let me turn it over to David Hay, who will give you some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Juan. Congratulations again, class of 2025, and welcome to the NYU Shanghai family. My name is David Pei, and I'm the Dean of Students for NYU Shanghai. I've been with the university since the beginning. In 2012, I moved out from New York to Shanghai to help set up the campus. And in my real job, which is the fun part, it's really working with you in creating the experience. I'm thinking about how your next 4 years at NYU Shanghai will be shaped, and thinking about how we can provide the resources and the support in making that experience memorable and also one that is unique to you. For those that are tuning in from California, saying hi to home. I'm originally from California, LA, born and raised. After undergrad, moved to NYU and actually worked at Washington Square for 8 years. And so I've been with NYU for the last 17 years of my career and very much love NYU as a campus and what it means to be here. In one of my roles, I really do want to focus on you in terms of celebrating your identities. So in this time with COVID and sort of what's happening in the world with a lot of challenges with some of the issues around Black Lives Matter, anti-Asian hate, and this doesn't just solely secluded to the US, but really happening around the world, especially with having 84 different countries represented in the class of 2025. I'm also a first-generation college student, first in the family to go to college. So I'm also sending out a congratulations to the 24% of our new class of 2025 students that are also first generation and first in the family. That is a wonderful accomplishment, and you'll get that experience at this university in which we will be focused on you. But it's also one of the wonderful pieces of being able to come to a university that's this small. With having only 500 other classmates, you really are going to have a wonderful experience, and you'll hear that from the students, and so I will sort of save that for them. As part of the class of 2025, I think one of the areas that we're really excited, and I shared this with some of your parents last week, and I'm sure we'll be doing more presentations in the coming months, is our new campus. You will get 2 experiences. When you arrive in the fall, you'll be able to experience what the last 8 classes of students have experienced here on Century Avenue. But then the last 3 years of your time will be celebrated and spent on the new Qiantang campus, which is a beautiful, designed, intentionally thought campus that will really make your experience somewhat unique. And so members of the class of 2025 will be really vital in helping us shape what that experience is going to be like for the future. And so you get to be a part of what I would say is our second wave of the pioneering experience here at the university. The other piece that I'm going to leave you with before I transition over to our wonderful panelists and for you to hear directly from your classmates is really thinking about how you're going to recenter yourself during your time here. I see it as very much, if you open your phone and the GPS is moving you around, right? And so when you move to China and when you're part of this experience and when you're thinking about what you're going to hear in the next hour or the rest of today after you start participating in the other sessions is really starting to prepare yourself to think about that recentering, that when you move here, you're really going to be looking at China and how the rest of your experience is going to be shaped from that. And so I think that's an important piece. And that happens too when you study away and when you're going to London or Florence or Tel Aviv or Sydney. Part of the NYU Shanghai and the NYU global experience is the ability to move yourself, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. And so I do hope that you really start to see and start to think about that aspect of what your time will look like during your next 4 years here. So I will come back at the end if there are still questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Carly and our wonderful 4 students here today. And congratulations again, and welcome to the NYU Shanghai family. Thank you.
Hello and welcome everyone. And I echo again, like Dean Pei and Juan already said, a warm congratulations and warm welcome to the NYU Shanghai process, NYU Shanghai family. I'm really excited to be here this morning with 4 of our current students to answer your questions. First, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Carly Ciuda. I'm a staff member here working at NYU Shanghai. I work in the Student Health Center, which is part of the Student Life team. So I'm part of the team that also helps to support the overall student experience here at NYU Shanghai. And just a couple more things about myself. I am American. I call Chicago home, but have been living outside of America for the past few years. And I'm also a proud alumna myself of NYU Shanghai and New York. I'm a graduate of the Master of Social Work program that I split my time between NYU here and New York. So now I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful students. We'll start with just a brief introduction, and I think we can start with Kevin to my right.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin, and I'm born and raised in Shanghai here. I'm currently a senior student in NYU Shanghai, major in business and finance. So during my past 4 years in NYU Shanghai, I've had a lot of campus involvement in here. I've been an orientation ambassador. I've also organized student club. I was a president of TED Talk in NYU Shanghai. So after I graduate, I'm going to work as an investment banking research analyst in JP Morgan.
See if this is on. Oh, yeah. Hi. So I'm Cindy, and I'm from the East Coast of the United States. I'm currently a freshman. It's a class of 2024. And in terms of my major, thinking business, but I'm not really sure. And I think NYU Shanghai is really nice in that I can still have time before the end of my sophomore year to really decide. And then around campus, I've done quite a bit already, even though I've only been here for a few months. But we're planning like I guess you would call it a program with the lead diversity initiatives. And that's this weekend, actually, I'm doing with Declan and a few other people. And so that's something I've been working towards. We also have a committee for the AAPI events that have been happening. And that's also going on the following weekend. I did a Zoom play last semester, and I'm thinking of maybe participating in volleyball. So there are a few things that I've been involved in here and there. But I think it's just really nice to be able to have different experiences. And then next semester, I accepted a position for being an RA, a residential assistant. So I'm excited to see what that's going to be like. And I hope to meet any of you guys maybe through that role next year.
Hi, so my name is Dajla. I'm from New York City. I'm currently a sophomore, and my major is Advanced Global China Studies. Right now, I'm a research assistant, a resident assistant, and an admissions ambassador. Previously, I was a student diversity advocate, and I was also a member of our school's reality show and a member of the Committee of Critical Inquiry.
I just turned it off. Hi, everyone. My name is Declan. I'm a sophomore here as well, majoring in global China studies and social science. I'm from Massachusetts. I call Worcester, Boston my home. It's kind of a split end there. I split my time on campus with, I'm the chief editor for On Century Avenue, which is our unofficial newspaper here on campus. I was an orientation ambassador last year for Cindy's class of 2024. I work with Queer and Ally Society here on campus as well. And then I also work with Cindy for the LEAD program. So I'm all over the place and not only on campus, but also off campus. And I'm sure everyone here on the panel can relate to that as well. Congratulations again, guys.
Thank you. And as you can see, these are 4 not only very involved, but dedicated students because it is 8:10 a.m. on Saturday in Shanghai, and we are here excited to answer your questions. So just a quick reminder, what we'll do for this is I'm going to share, first our panelists will answer a few general questions, and then we will take questions from you, our participants on the webinar. So again, please remember to use the chat function on your Home for the Weekend app or webpage to submit your questions. You can start submitting questions as soon as they come up for you. We'll have some folks here who are responding via the chat, and then we'll choose a few to share with have our panelists answer for you. So the first question is, at this point in the process, all of you already know that NYU Shanghai is a really unique school in many ways. And we understand that as you're going through this virtual Home for the Weekend process and the rest of your process of decision-making, you're still probably wondering if NYU Shanghai is the right choice for you. So I'm going to ask our 4 panelists to take yourselves back to when you were in this process of thinking about your college decision and had been admitted to NYU Shanghai. And if you could just share a little bit about maybe what were some of the important points of information that helped you choose NYU Shanghai, if there was any one really special or unique thing that made you decide that NYU Shanghai is the place for you. And if you have any advice for the students who are in this point of the process, then go ahead, whoever wants to start.
Yes, I could start because as a freshman, I think it's the closest for me and my experience. I think when I was choosing, I had a lot in mind, and I heard a lot of people suggest like making a list of pros and cons, which in all honesty, I think out of all the schools, many things are very similar because I was looking for a place that was diverse and in general, a place where it was, I guess, a liberal arts school. So I didn't really see that as a very helpful thing, but I think definitely try that out. For me, what really caught my eye was because I imagined myself studying away somewhere throughout college. I didn't know exactly when, but then when I realized it was like, oh, I got accepted into NYU Shanghai, for me, it just clicked. I was like, okay, so if I really want to be like a risk taker and think outside the box, what can I do? Where can I be? And it just made sense for me to go somewhere. And I think COVID probably had a lot to do with it because I was in, I don't know, Zoom classes, and it's just been like a lot of quarantine. And so when I was deciding, I was like, oh, okay. So now looking at all this, I think it's really time for me to experience something different. And I think I really did get that. So I'm really glad that I decided to make the choice and come to NYU Shanghai.
So I can go next. For me, my decision was based off of 3 points. And the last point is kind of connected to Cindy's, but I'll get to that. So for me, I'm interested in pursuing law afterwards. And I had been to China before, and I really loved Shanghai, but I had, I thought I was going to have to give up, like kind of my secret dream was to go to college in China. But I was like, there's no way that this can happen for me. I was taking Chinese, but very limited. And so I was like, there's no way this can be true for me and also get a liberal education that will allow me to pursue law in the future. And then when I heard of NYU Shanghai, I was like, perfect. I was actually an early decision, the only school I applied to, because for me, it was a matter of I would be able to study Chinese and really immerse myself in Chinese culture authentically, while at the same time pursuing this education, this liberal education that I really saw as very valuable for my studies. So those were my 2 kind of like academic reasons. And I think my third reason, which is connected to Cindy's of like wanting to experience something different, I think similar again, that a lot of the colleges are very similar in a lot of ways. And so for me, something that stood out about NYU Shanghai was that knowing that it was such a unique experience, and that like not only your classes are diverse, but also just the environment that you're going to be in is so dynamic and so different from anything that I would have experienced before. I'm a person who really values like growth. And I knew that I would be able to grow here in a way that I wouldn't have been able to grow anywhere else. And because it's not a matter of just, you know, going to classes and learning what I'm doing in the classroom, but also just as a lifestyle and authentically, like the people I'm meeting and the life I'm living is going to force me to grow in ways that otherwise I would not have been able to experience. And so I knew that having to be somewhere that is completely different than what I expected, of course, comes with its own challenges. And, you know, it's kind of scary, but at the same time, I knew it was going to shape me. And like at the end of the 4 years, I was going to be someone who was going to be able to challenge themselves and going to be able to accept difference. And so that's my advice to you. Not only think about, you know, what opportunities colleges have to offer and like what classes you want to take, but also think of the question of what kind of person do you want to be at the end of the 4 years, and how does the actual environment of that institution going to allow you to grow into that person at the end of the 4 years? I think that's a great question to consider when you're making your decision.
So when I was deciding if I want to go to NYU Shanghai, there was 3 things about this school that really appeals to me. The first one is the design of the school. We have half Chinese students and half international students. So this really gives both international and Chinese students good exposure to other cultures. And also it is mandatory for the first year students to live with, for Chinese students to live with international students as a roommate and vice versa. So NYU Shanghai really pushes hard for people to engage with people from diverse background. And that is a really appealing thing to me, especially as a person who was born and raised in Shanghai. So I really want to explore the wider world. And the second reason is that NYU has a really wide global network of campuses. So we have campuses in cities around the world, in Europe, in US, here in Shanghai, in Abu Dhabi, in Africa. So I think this is a really cool thing that in junior year, students get to decide which city, which campus they want to study abroad in. And normally students have 2 semesters time to study abroad. So you can either choose to study abroad in 1 city for a year, or in 2 cities in different semesters. So that's the second thing that really appeals to me. And the third thing is that NYU Shanghai really has a high academic standard. So as far as I know, from a perspective of a Chinese student, my Chinese student peers, they all come from the top schools in Shanghai, in China, and they could have gone to the top 4 colleges, universities in China, but otherwise still they choose here. So I think this is a academically really stimulative and challenging environment. It really helps us grow academically. So those are my 3 reasons. And in terms of my advice to students choosing which school to go to, I think echo with the previous 2 points. So I think it's also about whether the things you want or your personality actually matches what the school gives you. So because of what NYU Shanghai provided, I think this was a great school for me personally. And I also encourage you to think in that way.
It's going to be sincerely hard to beat each of these responses, but I will do my best. So for me, it was weird because I say I'm from Worcester and Boston because I feel like this push to sort of give like a city to, you know, where I'm from. But for me, my hometown is really just kind of the state as a whole, but I'm more so from a rural area. So coming from the west of the state, it's towards the Berkshires, towards the mountains, and it's something that, when I was deciding for universities, all of my friends were going to in-state because it's just more practical in the United States to go to a public university that's in state. You get a lot of scholarships that way. It's cheaper. It's just more practical. So for me, it was always, I had my eyes set on like 3 universities, just like everyone else around me did. And that's kind of just the life that I lived. And I think for me, this sounds very like, like Hallmark movie-esque, but like I had this guidance counselor that was like, like I know that all these kids are, exploring just these few universities, but I kind of want you to, explore just outside of that. And by just outside, she meant like New York State. And I was like, okay, I'll look at like New York University. I'll look at other universities. That was sort of like peaking like price range as well. I was just like, you know what? Let me just look to see where I'd be a right fit. Money is always in the picture, but I was just trying to think about, where would I fit the best? And for me, I'm a very spiritual person. I grew up hiking all my life. You would never see me wearing like a collared sweatshirt. I was always wearing khakis and plaid shirts and things that were kind of gross, things not to be seen by an urban environment is what my mother would say. So I just was never used to the lifestyle. And I came to ASW, and that was sort of like, so I got accepted in December, kind of like Dajla, or a decision. And I came to ASW just to sort of solidify and make sure this was the right choice. And before I went on the plane, my mom was like, when you're there, you really need to picture yourself here. You're going to be surrounded by kids that have lived in cities their whole life, probably. You're going to be around kids that maybe learn Chinese their whole life as well, and nothing. But for me, it was just sort of, taking a deep breath, sort of exploring what the city has to offer in terms of, there are quiet spaces in the city. There are places for you to sort of discover yourself, be yourself, because the city has absolutely everything. Everything that your city back home or town, Shanghai has 10 times more, probably. And so that's just one thing that for me, there was a big culture shock. And I say that I come from like the trees, that's exaggerated. But coming from a rural area where you're not surrounded by so many people every day, metro doesn't exist. You still have an old tram in your town. There's still like old village shops and things like that, versus like, Walmart and like chain stores and stuff like that. So coming to here, some advice that I would give to you is sort of just during this panel, during this weekend, when you're sort of hearing different students' voices and what they've experienced, one thing is you absolutely should ask questions. And that's something that I personally failed to do when I was going to ASW. For me, I kind of took my mom's advice to heart and just really thought about myself and only sort of my experience. I wasn't really asking other students what they felt because I was convinced they were feeling something different than I was. And that's absolutely not true. Everyone is sort of going through the same mindset. They're sort of going through the same decisions. Whether it's this university or other ones, you should always be asking questions whether or not it's the right fit for you. Questions like, are there spiritual places for you? Am I able to access a dance studio? Is there something, am I able to do archery here? Is there good weather? Is the pollution really as bad as they say it is? All these kinds of things. Yes, it is. All these kinds of things, you should be asking yourself. Whether or not it's the right fit for you is always just be asking questions is my personal advice for you.
Great. Thank you all so much for sharing some aspects of your journey and decision. Just to echo what Declan said, ask questions. The chat is open on your Pathable webpage. So feel free, if you have some questions now, go ahead and put them in the chat. Continue doing that as we go on for the rest of our session. And the next question for our panelists is actually something that Declan also brought up in your answer. It's a little bit more of a practical question, but I know something that most of you all probably have on your mind, which is about language. So NYU Shanghai is an English language instruction environment. So your classes will be in English, but we are in China. So Mandarin Chinese is the working language here. And it will be the primary language of your everyday life. So learning Chinese and using Chinese language is definitely one of the most exciting aspects of being at NYU Shanghai, but it can also be intimidating. So for our panelists, I'd just like to ask you, so Declan, Dajla, and Cindy, if you could share a little bit about your own experience of coming to NYU Shanghai, learning and using Chinese language. And Kevin, if you might be able to speak a little bit about being a Chinese classmate here and maybe how you have supported your international friends and classmates in that process.
I can go like in reverse order here for you guys. So for me, and this sounds extremely cheesy, and I totally understand that, but I have to say it. When I was growing up, my mother spoke Gaelic, and that was sort of like her mother tongue. That's what she always spoke with me. It was really my father that was like the English speaker, and then they would sort of translate across each other. So for me, learning second languages was always so important. And I think that's one of the big things that I kind of missed in touching upon with my previous answer was speaking a second language is an absolute privilege for me. To be able to have parents that speak another tongue. It's also very difficult. And you realize that kind of struggle as they're growing up, that they're not in an environment that they're used to. She was born in Ireland. But for me, coming here to China, I knew absolutely zero Chinese. I was super, super nervous, like extremely nervous about sort of being behind with my classmates because I was assuming people like Dajla and Cindy would have so much more experience, and they definitely did have way more experience than I do, but that's totally okay. Having no experience is totally, totally fine. And I can assure you that there's always resources here to help you out as well. But I just want to push and say that you should always, always, always push yourself out of your comfort zone. There are people here that will be so, so nice and ready to help you out with your Chinese experience. You're going to have a roommate that is going to be able to speak fluent Chinese, probably, I hope. So, they will be able to help you out with absolutely anything. It is nerve-wracking. You can feel really anxious when you're going to a store, you're interacting with people for the first time, and you're just really not comfortable using the language, but you should always be able to step out of your comfort zone. I think that's one of the biggest things. And my mother always said, when you're speaking someone's, mother tongue, you're speaking to their heart, not their mind, is one of the things that she said. So, try to speak to people's hearts. It's so cheesy. It's so Hallmark. And I know, but it's okay. I think one of the things that you will understand when you're here is that once everyone is kind of in the same boat, you will sort of follow along with that as well. You're not the only one that's learning another language for the first time. You're not the only one that's perhaps struggling or sort of you feel a little behind. Do not worry. Just take a deep breath. You're going to be absolutely fine. And I can assure you that your Chinese will be amazing by the time that you graduate from here after 4 years.
So to add on, I'll touch on something, excuse me, that Declan said, but regarding my experience, even though I had taken Chinese throughout high school, let me tell you, when I took that placement test, that I arrived in elementary one, the very most basic level that everyone, most international students ends up in. And when I was here, there was a lot of pointing at menus and pointing at things, saying this and that in Chinese. So very basic. And today, now the research that I'm doing is completely all in Chinese. And so it's all about reading Chinese and analyzing the text and things like that. And so it's been only 2 years. And even in that amount of time, I've made such a big jump in my language. And I can attribute that to 2 things. I would say that even in your first term here, you don't have to know any Chinese. And of course, like anything new, it is stressful and nerve-wracking a little bit, because of course you'll be all in your head about it. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that when you're always in your comfort zone? So I think it's natural to feel discomfort in the face of something new. But you'll quickly realize that your teachers are so willing to help. And in the first term, within the first few weeks, you'll be able to get so much better at being able to order your bubble tea, like being able to navigate the train system, being able to communicate with your taxi driver. And the classes are really oriented towards that. And they're really well and methodical in building your skill and leveling up. I would say the second component is that, you're not just learning language in an environment where it's solely in the classroom. You're applying it every single day in your life. You're hearing it every day. You can have the opportunity to talk to your classmates in Chinese, but you have to use it and you're going to be utilizing it. And so it becomes such a large aspect of your life that even if you're trying or not, naturally you'll improve the longer that you're here and by the time that you're here because of practice. But that's where I'll add on to kind of what Declan was saying, that I think a large part of this experience and the decision to come here is related that if you're someone who comes here, you're someone who embraces difference, right? And you're someone who embraces kind of pushing yourself to interact in like being environments that are different than what you've known, because no matter who you are, whether you're a Chinese mainland student or an international student, you're going to be experiencing something new to you. And so how does that relate to Chinese learning is that it's all about, I think, being true to the reason why you came here, and that's to experience difference and experience culture. And so it's about being strong enough to actually have the courage to take that step out of your comfort zone. And so the big thing about language is having to utilize it in your daily life. And again, of course, it provides like a little bit of anxiety trying something new, but I think the more comfortable you grow and kind of being honest to this decision to, you know, engage with different cultures and utilize what you're learning in the classroom, also outside of the classroom in this environment, and getting the most out of it will help your Chinese like improve immensely. And so I think that's also another component of studying here.
I absolutely love that. No, but I think I'm on a different side of the spectrum where I actually do speak Chinese fluently, and it's something that I've been really interested in the States as well. So I would watch a lot of Chinese shows, and it was something that was just around me. But even coming here, I've realized that like the growth is crazy. Like for me, having to, I guess, put myself in an environment where Chinese is always the main language, is the switch, and it's just very different and different experience for me. But even for the international people that are around me, I've realized that a lot of the people I came with, like on the plane, I would translate every single word for them. And then now I go out with them and they are totally fine. I'm really surprised. I'm like about to translate. There's like, okay, no, I got it. I'm just like, wow, it's absolutely crazy. So I think they might not realize it, but when they are in this environment and you see the language everywhere, it's really doing something to your learning curve, and it's really helping you develop the language in a different way. And something I've actually heard is I did take a Chinese class. It's called classical Chinese. And because I tested, I would say kind of out of the language. And there are actually a bunch of courses after that, even that you can take. And it was really interesting. We looked at a lot of old texts, and it's just very interesting because you realize that it's on a different level, and Chinese is very complex. So even if you are fluent, there are courses offered. And I actually didn't know that before coming here. So that's something unique. But I've heard from a lot of the international students that the Chinese teachers here are amazing. Like they really do feel like they are on a mission to like create this better environment and help everybody learn Chinese. And I thought that was really sweet. I even know one of my friends, he is a FOS student. So it's like science or something along the lines of STEM. And so the Chinese classes are a little bit different, but he's the only one in that class. And so he's the only one on like in person, because I think there are people online. So the teacher gave him a separate session just for him. Like that's his own class, and he gets to talk to the teacher the entire class. And I thought that was super sweet. And I would have never imagined that anywhere else. Like I don't think I could see that at another university, a teacher leaving this a lot of time just for one student to learn a language. So I think that's also a very important part of it, where people here are just very encouraged to use the language. And as we've like mentioned before, I think it's a lot about like what you want out of the language as well, what you put in. So if you are going to go out and at least attempt the language, it's just, you can see that growth and it's going to happen. And even if you aren't very comfortable going out, we always go in groups. I think I've heard from a lot of the upperclassmen how they're like, oh, the freshmen are so cute. They're always together in a huge group. But it's because like a lot of them don't feel comfortable using the language yet. So we really do travel in bigger groups and we go eat together. And if, you know, we can help one another out, it's just very comfortable. And so this environment is definitely there. I think everybody's working towards a similar goal. There's not like, oh, I'm trying to be better than anybody. It's very peaceful, and we're all trying to grow in our certain way and get somewhere with what we want to do with the language. And so I think it's just really sweet. I haven't heard anything to like on the opposite end of just like not liking Chinese. I think most people here are very open to the idea of experiencing this new language and just trying something new.
As a Chinese student, I see that there are a lot of resources that could help international students learn Chinese. And I think the most important one is that you're actually in Shanghai. So you are living every day in a city where everyone speaks Chinese. So when you order takeout deliveries, when you order a ride-hailing car, when you order something in restaurant, they all speak to you in Chinese. So at first, if you feel like you're very uncomfortable that you speak zero Chinese, it's okay, because once you're in this immersive environment, the speed of growth is really beyond your imagination, because you're using this language every day and literally all the time. And also, I think a great thing about Chinese people here is that when they see a foreigner, they actually don't expect you to speak Chinese. So if the first thing you speak, when you open your mouth, you talk to them in Chinese, most of them will be really happy, and they would be really patient with you when they speak back, and even teach you something, probably. And also, as a Chinese student who have like international friends who wants to let me help them learn, I think I've also like provided a lot of support. I think at the meantime, when international students reach out to their Chinese friends for help, it's a very good bonding experience. So I think at first, a lot of students are a little bit nervous or don't know how to approach people from different background, cultures, or countries. So international students speaking to Chinese students is always a good icebreaker and a great way to start a good friendship or relationship.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your perspective. And I see we had at least one question in the chat about that. So I hope that gives some perspective that really the best way maybe to prepare to learn Chinese is just come to Shanghai and meet your classmates, and your speed of growth will be super high. So the last question that I have for our panelists before we start taking some questions from the participants is just a little bit more about the transition process from high school to college. So this can be, we all know this is a really exciting transition, but we can often feel like we don't really know what to expect in the transition, especially coming to a different country or coming to a really unique environment like NYU Shanghai. So if each of you could just share a little bit about your transition to NYU Shanghai, maybe a little bit about what were your expectations and what challenges or what surprises did you have in that process?
I guess transitioning for me, I was really ready to, I guess, step out of high school, because I think the 4 years was very heavy for me and I had done a lot. And so I really did need a new environment. And so I was really ready. What really was difficult, I think COVID made the decision-making a lot more difficult, since I had to think about more factors, like how will travel be? And there was just more things on my mind, like, is it safe? And something along those lines. But I think overall, the thing that I hear a lot of people around me worry about is being very far away from home in our scenario, because we are very far. There is a time difference. It changes between 12 and 13 hours, depending on daylight savings. You have to figure that out. There's a lot of things that you might not be used to, and like even little things like the metric system, or people hear you Celsius and people hear you centimeters. It's very strange, but it affects me. Like sometimes I've tried to train myself to use Celsius, and then I tell somebody today's 20 degrees. They look at me and like, why is it freezing? And I'm like, it's not, it's Celsius. Yeah. So there are little things and things that you do have to realize are going to be different. And I think that was the mental process that was hard, telling myself that now I'm going to be in like an environment that's not going to be the same as something I'm used to, and really planting that in my system and being like, oh, okay, so is there something that I might have to do mentally, give myself a little bit of a break and just tell myself that it's okay if I'm not familiar with something. And I think that mental process was probably the hardest part for me. Since I was really ready, I actually, during the summer, we moved. So I'm actually born in Maryland, went to high school in Virginia, and then I moved back to Maryland. So during that, I guess, packing stage, it really helped me for some reason, because I was pretty much packing things and it was very visual for me. I was like putting things away and getting ready to start something new. So I think if it helps to maybe reflect on like some things that you've done before and then really just have like a closure, because I think a lot of people don't realize how important closure is. So do that, and then maybe it'll help you get ready for something that is new. But But I think that we do really overlook like the fun parts. Connecting to like the Chinese thing earlier, I've realized like there's a lot of little things here that are really funny to me that I didn't realize I was going to experience. Like there's a Family Mart, which is like a convenience store. And so there's like an automatic checkout thing that says 支付成功. And all the internationals love to say it in this like funny accent. They know how to say it right too, but they're just like 支付成功. And I'm just like, this is so cute because they pick up on like really cute things. And it's just really fun being in an environment where you're not familiar with things, but you can like make jokes out of things that you would never expect back home in the States for me. So I think this is just being open to things was definitely something I had to tell myself, but at the same time, it's probably something that really helped me and make the experience a lot better. Yeah.
So me, the biggest difference for me was in college, I started to realize that I have so much liberty in terms of time, when you can choose what you can do. So back in high school, your schedule is set. You don't have as much free time because you have so many things that you're required to do. But when you come here, you can choose the classes based on your interest. And also you have so much free time that you can arrange for yourself. At first, it was a difficult thing for me because I didn't really know that much about what I'm supposed to do with all that much free time. So I kind of feel a little bored and nervous about if I'm using those time effectively. But as the time goes, I started to realize that this is an actual advantage that because having so much liberty and free time, you are able to actually do things that you love, that you are passionate about. So for me, I decided to take a lot of classes that I'm super interested in, such as classes in business and finance. And before that, I also explored a lot of classes in social sciences. So that's in terms of exploring your interests academically. And also during my free time, I also use my free time to engage in a lot of campus opportunities. As I mentioned before, I organized student clubs, and I've also been an orientation ambassador, welcoming freshmen. But I also see my friends who do different things that they like. If you're into sports, there's plenty of sports team you can go into. So yeah, that was the biggest difference.
For me, my big two things, they're both related to what has just been said, was one, that I am really loss prone. So, and my high school years, I went to boarding school. And so we had like a really close campus, and like my boarding school, we had something called the Circle, and it's a big patch of grass. And then all the buildings were around this patch of grass. So I never had to really like travel anywhere. And so for me, it was like having to navigate how to take the train system, and having to navigate like how to walk around the city, despite being from New York, was something that I had a little bit of like stress about when I first came here. But then I was really surprised by how quickly and how much support I had in getting over this, because I came a little bit earlier. So when I was by myself, it was a journey. But then when I came to school, immediately within the first day of being here, because of orientation ambassadors and all the support from my RAs, I became immediately familiar with the area around the dorms, the area around school. I learned how to take the train by myself, the bus by myself, order a DD, or like use all the apps that are necessary for living life here. And so I was really surprised by kind of how quickly I was able to adapt, just because the amount of support was so immense. I would also say, similar to the last response, was that I was also amazed by how much time I had. And I'm a person who I can work and work and work for days. And so having to, actively decide that I'm going to step out and I'm actually going to explore the city and navigate the city and experience and take advantage of the fact that I'm here was something that I had to adjust to, figuring out in my schedule that, working hard on your academics obviously is a really strong priority, but also taking advantage of being able to apply what you're learning in the classroom to real life here. And again, I'm a big believer in the ideology that I think something that is a unique attribute to all the students here is that we're all here to experience something different for ourselves, and we want to experience something new. And being able to take advantage of that to the fullest requires taking the courage and taking the energy and active effort in trying and experiencing new things. And so that was kind of adjustment of, like Cindy said, reminding myself to do so and making the time and commitment to do so.
Yeah, I guess for me, once again, relatable mood. Yeah, right. I think one thing for me was I was used to living a very independent sort of lifestyle, and I think maybe a lot of us can sort of agree to that. But again, I think time is the biggest factor. But I think one of the main factors that you'll see a lot of people here is that, when it comes to daily routines and taking care of themselves and all these kinds of things, NYU Shanghai is known for like students that are really independently motivated, independently driven. That being said, there is support every step of the way. You don't have to know everything, and you shouldn't know everything. And that's one of the things that even being back home, it was this kind of thing where I felt sort of very alone. One, there was not a lot of people around, and if there was something that you didn't really know, you had to sort of figure it out yourself. If your parents didn't know it, if your siblings didn't know it, you were kind of stuck. You didn't really know what to do. So asking for help was honestly one of the things that was the first step for me coming here. I just, when it was like using apps and getting bank information and all these things that you're going to have when you come to Shanghai, is a huge transition in terms of just the technical side, let alone sort of exploring the city and sort of figuring yourself out. That seems to come later. When it comes to like the sort of the techniques at the first stage, was really hard for me as well, because I just didn't know how to ask for help. That was sort of, honestly, it's one of the things that I just didn't really know what to do. And even when I was coming here and I was starting to step out and explore the city, I realized that when it comes to just executing your daily life, ways to sort of make it seem like home. And I think Cindy touched on this as well, like you've done a lot of these transition steps before and you didn't even realize it in your life. And I'm sure a lot of you have experienced such amazing lives already up to this point. You've done so many different things. You've been so many places probably. So coming to Shanghai, you're going to see like, oh, I've kind of done this before. Like downloading an app can seem kind of daunting sometimes, honestly, whether it's taking the metro, these little things. Like for me, when I pack for every single day, I teach it like I'm packing like a hiking backpack. I even have like a rain cover in my backpack. And somebody on the metro once asked me, he's like, what is this? And I'm like, it's a rain cover. Like it covers like for my computer and all that stuff. And he's like, where do I get that? And I'm like, Worcester, Massachusetts. Like I have no idea. But to me, it's just these little things that can sort of make it seem like you've done it your entire life is something that you'll kind of notice every kind of student does. Like little routines and things like that. For some people, it's like ordering coffee in the morning. You can do that in Shanghai. If you come from a city and you've done it all the time, you can totally do that. If you take walks, I consider hiking on a flat surface something you can absolutely do in Shanghai. It doesn't have to be up a mountain. It can be just down Century Avenue and you get the same amount of steps in. So that's something that I've also realized. All these little transitional steps that you've done before, sort of reflect back and take back some time to sort of see, what are some challenges that I've had in the past. I'm sure for your essays coming into universities, you've been asked every possible question about challenges in your life. So all of those are serious questions that you can ask yourself. When it comes to difficulties, for me, it was absolutely just asking for help, knowing things, where to go, what to do, what the resources were. I was not used to that. To me, it was a very independent lifestyle growing up. So sort of knowing that I had resources, OAs, RAs, people like that. Staff members here at the school are fantastic. Professors as well. You can even ask them where to eat. They're amazing people and resources as well. So every single person, everything, every little thing counts is something that I can say, asking for help.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think that this is certainly helping our participants understand that it is possible to make this transition and succeed and get on your feet here and thrive in Shanghai. So we have about 10 minutes left in our time. So I'm going to try to get at least 2 questions from our audience that came in. And the first question is, so we've had a few folks ask about the roommate relationship in general. So I'm going to combine a few of these questions together. So one is, if you could talk a little bit about the overall communication process with your cross-cultural roommate. What happens if a conflict arises, if you've had any experience sort of working through that conflict? And then we got a really great question, which is if anyone could share a favorite roommate memory.
I have my favorite roommate memory like in the top of my mind. My roommate to this day is one of my best friends. I love her. And my favorite memory is that one day, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the rom-com Tall Girl, which is very notorious on Netflix, but it's a very silly film. And I was 10 minutes into it and my roommate was in the room and I was dying of laughter. And she was just like, oh, like, what are you watching? And I was telling her and she's trying to find it herself. And I was like, why are you trying to find it? Like, let's watch it together. And so it was just like this really sweet memory of us just sharing through and like watching this movie and like cracking up together. And I do a little bit of theater in the school, have done some theater in the school. So I'm a little bit dramatic when I watch my films. And it was so fun because it was like, I've never had anyone who kind of shared my energy and enthusiasm watching a film, but my roommate and we were just laughing the whole time and like reacting the whole time. And it was just such a simple memory, but my roommate and we had so many more moments just like that. It was, I think, just the daily things of going to hot pot together, eating lunch together, talking about Chinese reality shows together and shows together. And that I think was one of the moments that really kind of solidified our relationship and bond. And I would say communication wise, some people do it very differently. So it's what works for you. I know one of my friends with their roommate that they would switch off. So one week they would utilize Chinese and the next week they would utilize English. Yes. So they really took advantage of the language experience. The other time, like sometimes I would it was just like Chinglish in my room. So using a mix. And so I think it's a matter of what's comfortable for you or what works for you guys. So that's kind of on like person to person basis, I would say. And additionally, if there's conflicts, I think it's not natural to happen just because, cultural differences, not even despite that, just like differences amongst people in general. And I think there's a lot of like support system from the RAs to help like facilitate communications with that, but also the big thing is going to be communication. Sometimes it's like a little thing of sometimes we have like washer and dryers in our room. It's like, oh, they use the washer at 8 a.m. Like, why did my roommate do that? And you don't say anything. And so the little things start to build up. And so the best advice we have to offer is that in an understanding way, not in a way that it's like targeting the person, but just talking about, roommate expectations, which is something that the RAs facilitate in the beginning of the year, where you're going to talk to your roommate actually about kind of what are the basic rules for the room. Like, when do you have guests? Like, what time are we going to bed? Like things like that you guys will have to talk about in the beginning of the year. And then you can always return to if something does arise. But also just my biggest recommendation is as things come, don't just not say anything and keep it inside, because that's how conflict truly arises. It's like, as little things come, like keep an active and honest communication while also being understanding that you may have to come to a compromise. So yeah.
Yeah, I think communication is very important, and I totally understand why it would be difficult, especially if you aren't familiar with Chinese or like vice versa. And so it would be very difficult, but you really do have to talk it out, because at that point, everything escalates and it bubbles up. So it's very important. I actually moved in around December. So like that was pretty much halfway through the semester. But I moved into a room where there was a little bit of a conflict before. And so my roommate's previous roommate moved out. So I moved in. That was how it worked out. But it was more because of the idea that like people were sleeping at different times. And like it was something where it was like habits that was really bothering them and wasn't really necessarily against each other. And so because of that, you can do a swap. And so they worked it out with their RA and everything, and things can happen and things will be resolved. And so it's not just set in stone. I think it's part of the experience. Also because my roommate before didn't have an international roommate because of the COVID situation. And so because of our swap, it just like made things more fun. We talk about everything too. There's just all kinds of interesting conversations, especially just me sharing like my experience in the States. And then she like returns with like, oh, actually in China, it's like this. And I think you really do learn a lot about the culture through that experience. I guess I wouldn't say a funny story. I really don't have her permission to say this, but she had an allergic reaction like a few weeks back. And so I went to the hospital with her until like 5 a.m. It was actually really fun because for me, the only 2 times I've been in the hospital in China were because of her. And I thought it was just really interesting because we went through like all the protocols and it's just really interesting because the time after that, we would always refer back and be like, remember that time when we got sent to the hospital? We called an ambulance and everything. And so it's just a different experience that I wouldn't have experienced myself. And along with that, like afterwards, she took me out for food. And I was just like, we really don't have to, but she was just very adamant. And it's just a good experience to like have this bonding experience with someone that you may or may not actually be friends with if you didn't already, I guess, know them. So there are just many things that can happen between each other. And for the most part, I've heard very positive reviews about people's roommates. And if you do have a conflict, people work it out and then it's just all good from there. And I know that in the beginning of the semester, I think there are a lot of rules set by the RA. Like we have meetings and we're like, okay, so in terms of like the washer, like if you're a freshman and you're living in the Jinqiao dorm, it's like one washer on every 2 floors. And so we figure out the times and we figure out like quiet hours and everything. So it's just pretty much putting your side of the, I guess, equation in, being like, this is what I want to achieve, and then everybody working something out. So for the most part, it's been very peaceful. Yeah.
So I think for a lot of time, people have a natural tendency to befriend people who are familiar with them. But when you have an roommate that is definitely going to be different from you, this is actually a good opportunity to learn from each other. So for me, my roommate was from America. So as a Chinese student, when he first came here, he was very shy. He didn't know a lot about Shanghai, about China. So I really helped him a lot in terms of navigating Shanghai, learning Chinese, inform him about the culture. And when I studied away in New York, he was still my roommate at that time, and we live in New York also. And then it became vice versa. He started to inform me about the culture there, how to navigate New York, because he's from New Jersey, so it's really close. And then, so he was able to give all these instructions for me. Yeah, so that was a positive thing about having a roommate from different background.
I think absolutely. I think this is such great advice. Communication is absolutely key. And with an RA sitting next to me here, I think that's one of the biggest things that you can definitely do. If communication isn't working out, there's always RA support for you as well. That's just kind of general advice. But for me, the roommate situation was always, we're both kind of like, what do you call it? Night owls? Night owl. Yeah. So we would always stay up super late, which is a bad habit. Don't do that. But if you do it with a friend. So we would always stay up together and we would always talk about current events. And that's probably one of the biggest things is that, even just after a week or two, I realized he was so comfortable with me to talk about issues that I would realize and kind of figure out that he would never really talk about with other people. Just because, with all around the world, there's just things that, it's kind of, you talk about people you're more comfortable with. And it just kind of made me realize that I was like, oh, like this is something that, I would never like have this sort of interaction back home. Even with other US friends, just other people, I would never have this kind of interaction ever. And then at some point I would always bring in words and I'm like, all right, It's 8 p.m. I have 10 Chinese phrases, and we're going to go over all of them to help me out. And he would always have different like shows, cultural references, things that he's experienced that he just kind of wants to explore. So yeah, absolutely. Just sort of exploring different options for your roommate. If there are ever problems, all right, it's general advice. And then go to bed on time is probably the best advice I could give.
Thank you so much. We have actually come to the end of our time for this morning, but I want to share another warm, enthusiastic thank you to our student panelists, and then also another warm welcome and congratulations to our participants. We do have to turn it back over to your next session, but to take the very wise advice from our students, this is the beginning of your virtual weekend at NYU. Keep asking questions. There'll be a lot of opportunities to get those questions answered, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you on campus. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everybody. Just as a reminder, things that are coming up, the academic journey, alumni panel, and other activities that we'll have available for you to engage in. So keep using the Home for the Weekend platform, and we'll see you soon.